This is the unbelievable story of a World War II bomber that took more damage than anyone thought possible, and still made it home. A B-17 Flying Fortress, hit by more than 500 rounds, ripped, battered, and barely holding together, yet somehow, it kept flying. Today, we are breaking down how a plane that should have fallen out of the sky refused to die. The story of the B-17 that survived more than 500 hits is one of the most astonishing examples of courage, engineering, and pure determination in aviation history, and it begins with a simple yet powerful reminder. Sometimes the machines built by human hands end up protecting the very humans who created them in ways no one could have predicted. During World War II, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress had already earned a reputation for being one of the toughest aircraft ever designed. But on one mission, a single bomber would push that reputation to its absolute limit. Early in the morning, the crew of this B-17 took off from England along with dozens of other bombers, all part of a mission deep into enemy territory. The crew members, ranging from young gunners barely in their 20s to seasoned pilots who had already flown several dangerous missions, knew that the moment they crossed over the coastline their chances of a safe return were never guaranteed. The air at high altitude was cold, thin, and filled with tension, and although the engines hummed steadily beneath the wings, every person on board understood that the sky above Europe had become one of the most dangerous battle zones on Earth. As they approached their target, the sky began to flicker with distant flashes, at first small and scattered, then growing into a dense pattern of explosions. What looked like tiny puffs of smoke from far away quickly revealed themselves as bursts of enemy fire filling the sky. The B-17 shook as the first shockwaves rolled past, and the pilot held the control steady, reminding the crew to stay calm and focused. Within minutes, the formation of bombers was swarmed by enemy fighters diving in from above, below, and both sides, their engines howling as they opened fire with relentless bursts. The B-17 took hits almost immediately. Metal rang like a bell with each impact, panels dented, and parts of the fuselage began to break away under the pressure. But even as hundreds of rounds tore through the outer skin of the aircraft, the crew inside held their positions. One of the gunners shouted over the intercom that they were taking fire from the left, another called out fighters approaching from the rear, and the pilot reminded everyone to keep their focus on their jobs. For every hit that landed on their plane, another crew in the sky was going through the same thing, and the only way to survive was to stay disciplined. The B-17's nickname, Flying Fortress, had always referred to its rugged design, but on this day it became clear just how accurate that nickname really was. Even after what would later be estimated to be more than 500 bullet impacts, the engines kept running, the wings held firm, and the crew was still able to maneuver. This wasn't because the plane was untouched, not at all. Control systems were damaged, windows cracked, and several parts of the exterior were torn open by the sheer intensity of the attack. But the essential systems, the core structure, and the engine mounts were strong enough to keep the aircraft in the sky. Once the enemy fighters finally broke away, the crew got their first real look at the extent of the damage. The wings were riddled with holes, some small, some shockingly large. The tail section had taken multiple hits, and it looked unbalanced. The radio had gone in and out during the worst moments of the attack, and several intercom lines inside the aircraft no longer functioned. Yet the engines continued to roar, and the pilot discovered that although the controls were stiff and slow to respond, the aircraft could still be guided. The crew had an important decision to make: attempt to land in enemy territory, bail out, or try the nearly impossible feat of flying all the way back across the hostile sky to reach friendly ground. Despite the enormous damage and the uncertainty about whether the plane could hold together, the crew agreed they would try to get home. They had flown together for long enough to trust each other, and they trusted the B-17 too. As they turned toward the coastline, the long journey home began. The bomber struggled to maintain altitude, losing height slowly but steadily. The pilot adjusted the engine power again and again, carefully balancing the thrust so the weaker side wouldn't pull the plane into a dangerous turn. Inside the aircraft, the crew members moved cautiously, aware that some areas of the fuselage were too damaged to support much weight. Even simple tasks like checking equipment had become difficult. Yet despite the challenges, the atmosphere inside the plane slowly shifted from panic to determination. Every mile they covered meant 1 mile closer to home. The closer they got, the more the landscape below shifted from enemy territory toward the coast. Eventually, they were met by friendly escort fighters who were stunned by what they saw. One pilot radioed in disbelief, asking how the damaged aircraft was still airborne. Another circled around, almost as if trying to understand how the wings were still attached. Reports later described the B-17 as looking like it had flown through a storm made entirely of metal. When the crew finally reached friendly airspace, a wave of relief swept over them. But one final challenge remained: landing the nearly crippled aircraft. Landing a fully functional B-17 was already a skill-dependent task, especially after a long mission. Landing one with heavy damage, limited control, and uneven engines was an entirely different challenge. As the pilot lined up for the runway, the aircraft shook more violently. The wheels came down. The bomber sank toward the ground faster than usual, and for a moment, it wasn't clear if it would land smoothly or hit too hard. When the aircraft finally touched down, the wheels bounced, the fuselage rattled, and the wings wobbled, but somehow the pilot kept control. The plane slid along the runway until it finally slowed to a stop. The crew climbed out, tired, shaken, and overwhelmed, but also proud and grateful. Only then could they fully see the destruction that the aircraft had endured. Hundreds of holes across the wings and fuselage, missing panels, damaged systems, and smoke marks streaked across the metal. And yet it had done what no one expected. It had brought its crew home. The incident became one of the most widely shared examples of the toughness of the B-17 and the bravery of the aircrews who flew them. It remains a reminder that in the most difficult moments, human teamwork, skilled engineering, and sheer determination can defy even the harshest odds. Today, historians look back at this mission not just as a story of a damaged aircraft, but as a symbol of resilience under impossible conditions and as a testament to the people who refused to give up even when their situation seemed hopeless. This is why the B-17 wasn't just a machine. It was a flying fortress in the truest sense, a companion that carried its crew through one of the toughest trials of their lives, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from strength alone but from the refusal to stop fighting when everything seems lost.